Oh, and pardon my manners. Special hello to Kiara, Nate, and Kevin. And you don't mind introducing yourselves? Okay, sounds good. Sounds good.
Does everyone have ability to share if you're seeing something on the screen?
Thanks, Nedrick.
You're welcome.
Okay, Nedrick is telling me that access is denied, so I won't worry about it. All right. Let me get my slide up. Let me share my screen.
Right, I'm looking at all of our pictures, and we all have that "it's the end of the semester" look going. You know, face kind of settles into a mask. It doesn't move very much.
Yes.
Well, at least everyone else looks fine, but my hair these last and evil days.
You're so obsessed. Your hair looks fine.
Oh my goodness.
A young man who's been serving as an intern. So, he's been our web intern for the year, and he hasn't had a haircut. And every time he gets on a call, he's now like, as soon as the camera pops up, he's like trying to comb it in different ways. It's fine, really. I have dog or cat hair on me somewhere. I keep seeing it flop around under my peripheral vision there.
I actually come like 20 minutes early instead of the 10 to 15 because I spend 5 just with my webcam settings fixing my hair, making it shape properly.
Eventually, it doesn't matter.
Okay, and it's now 12 o'clock. And without any further ado, I guess.
Carolyn, maybe give us another minute. I think you're still missing one presenter.
No, I think all three are here.
Oh, did I miss Eric coming in?
Oh yes, that's right. We are missing one. Right, there's only Kiara, Nate, and Kevin.
Yeah, so we are expecting Eric.
Okay, any word from Eric?
I have not heard anything.
Okay.
But Eric's FD director is here, so I think she's expecting him to be here.
Yes, I'm expecting him to be here, so.
Good to see you, Ms. Salzgiver.
You too, as always.
Dr. Reed Brown, if you want to go ahead, obviously we'll let him in when he comes, and he's already sort of the last presenter, so.
Okay, yes, I was about
He
to
just
ask.
messaged me and he said he is joining. He just messaged me, so he'll be here.
Okay. All right, so with that, welcome everyone to another session in what continues to be an amazing series in our Douglas Research and Debate Days. And I just want to welcome everyone who has made it possible for this event to happen. Special congratulations to the organizers, to all the FDI directors, to our director, Dr. Veronica Watson, and the support team that has been able to make this a reality. And today, as we go through our presentation, the topics that are going to be discussed, presented on, are quite poignant, especially within the context of what is going on in the country today, as we all, I mean, as a nation, and indeed the world, await the verdict in the Chauvin trial. And I just want to extend to all of those in attendance solidarity, understanding that you have the support of all of us here, and feel free to share words of encouragement on our Padlet. The link has been included in the chat. And one of the things that I can attest to, the fact that sharing with each other, encouraging each other, lifting each other up really helps, right? We're all in this together. We will be having an evaluation of the session at the end, and I will be included that link in the chat. You will also be receiving a link for the attendance receipt, and we'll post that in the chat at the end. And so without any further ado, we're going to dive into our presentation, which begins today with Kiara Campbell from Clarion University of Pennsylvania, who has participated in the I Fear for My Life project. And so I'm going to hand over to her, and she will introduce herself. And at this point, the floor is yours, Kiara.
All right, hi everyone. So I'm Kiara Campbell. I'm a senior sociology major with a minor in social work at Clarion University. And I do have a PowerPoint, so I'm gonna share that really quick before I begin. Okay, can everyone see that? Alrighty. All right, so I'm gonna be talking about community and change. And like I said, I'm Kiara Campbell, senior sociology major. All right, so does anybody have any idea the amount more Black people are killed more than white people? Does anyone have a guess on the number? All right, that's fine. So it's 2.6 times more than white people. And I just wanted to start off my presentation with putting that in your mind, just so you guys can kind of think about that as we're talking through our conversation. So in order to move with this conversation and change, we have to get through 3 main challenges, and it's working with community relations between police and their respective communities, police reform, and community togetherness. And by recognizing these challenges, we can move from complacency to action. We're going to talk more about what that means later. So we're going to look more into those challenges really quick. So the first challenge, community relations, it was one of the main topics that continually came up when we were talking with interviewees about everything, because it is very important for your community, whether it's your location and your environment that you're around, or it's your racial community, to be strong and to be together, and especially when it comes with relationships with police as well. It's very important. Then we also have police reform. Having an increase in training for police officers was also something that several interviewees had spoken up about whenever we were talking with them. And this does not necessarily mean defunding the police or anything like that. We're going to go more in depth about all those kind of things, but it's really just talking about having that increased training, allocating funds, bringing social workers in, and those kinds of things. And lastly, community togetherness, which kind of seems like the same thing as community relations, except it's more within that community. When your entire community is working together, that's when you can make change, and that's when you can make waves in this conversation. And it was just another point that was brought up a ton whenever we were talking with our interviewees. So before I start talking about the interviewees, I figured I should just give you a little bit of idea of who all I was talking with. We talked with law enforcement officials, politicians, faith leaders, professors, and more, and really just people that were actively trying to change our society and working with different people in these places with police brutality. So one of the first people that we interviewed, I think this was actually our very first interview that we did, was Pastor Troy Martinez. And I just was really so fascinated with his entire story and where he came from. He came from a very violent kind of gang area as he was growing up. He had seen a lot of atrocities as he was growing up. And then he finally became a pastor in the 1980s, and he founded 10,000 Kids, which I'm going to talk about in one more second. And he works with the Las Vegas community to help with police and community relations, in hopes that if they're better, it'll bring down the crime rates. So 10,000 Kids was where Pastor Troy began going into the communities where cops were killing people, and when the communities were doing funerals for the young Black males that were usually killed in violent ways, and they were denied decent burials and funerals because they were in gangs. So he was going into these communities, trying to at least talk to these kids, show them that people care, because like I have a quote here at the bottom where he said, no one was helping these kids when their friends would die. Their communities were falling apart and people weren't worried about it. So he was going in there to make sure that they had someone to talk to, that they understood what was going on, and just to try to open up that conversation so he could be kind of the middleman between community and police so they can understand what's going on with each other. So this is just a few more quotes from him and everything. He works with his community day in and day out to try to strengthen the community relationships between police and the people that they do serve, because the kids around there have it burned in their brains that cops will hurt them, and cops don't understand and are naive. When there's this disconnect there and the community just doesn't trust the police, but the police don't understand why they don't trust them, they're going to continue to have these problems. So the communication has to be open on both sides to learn, and that's what Pastor Troy's main goal is with everything that he does. And then I just have a few quotes over here from Pastor Troy that, again, just really enjoyed. Just cops cannot think that they're invincible, and the community is at a point of fighting back. And if policing is a job where you expect to get killed, shot, or retaliated, continue doing what you're doing to the community. But if you don't, then we need to have new solutions. And then he also just talked about how there's no equality in the training, and all of the guidelines and everything are very different, which can also cause a lot of problems within different communities as well. Next, I talked with Mayor Ella Jones, and she was one of my favorite interviews of the entire time, mostly just because I remember very vividly when Michael Brown was shot and killed. I was 15 in high school, and it was just something that definitely has shaped me a lot in my future growing up and all of those kinds of things. So it was really interesting to get to talk to someone that lived there and that really woke up when this happened. Mayor Ella had talked about how she was just awakened by Michael Brown shooting, and she was the one that actually said the whole complacency to action thing, which I just thought was so profound in a way, just because that's what a lot of people need to realize is these conversations are just conversations until you make a change. So the conversations are important to have, but just talking isn't going to do much, and you have to move from those complacencies to action. So her platform that was the most appealing was that she gave her community a voice when her community felt like they didn't have a voice. People were telling her that they weren't happy, and she really does believe that her success is because of her drive to help the people in her community, which is just so important to her. So we talked to her a lot about police reform, because especially after Michael Brown happened in Ferguson, she went in there and she really was trying to change things up with their police community, with their police and everything with their community as well. So we asked her, just who do you think needs to be at the table for these conversations about police reform? And she gave us so many other people that need to be there, like DOG, judges, prosecuting attorneys, the PAs, everyone outside of just your local community and your local politicians have to be included in these conversations, because it's not just at a local level anymore, it's at a national level, and national policies need to be placed, which she does talk about there. I have some other quotes where she was just saying that she was just so busy in our lives, we didn't understand what the undeserved were going through. And I think that happens a lot nowadays, especially just with everyone being so busy with their lives, social media, not paying attention to what's actually happening, and all those kinds of things that you just don't realize whenever it's not happening to you, what's happening in society. We just also need to understand that constitutional policing needs to be across the country. The state doesn't govern their police, and they don't want to be identified half the time, and you need to have a national standard. And I think that's something that's really going to help change if they have rules to follow from the top rather than just rules from whoever's in their community, because it can be different from every community and people still have biases that they're not going to get rid of just over a training or something of that sort. So, and then I might have lied. I think she might have also been my favorite, like, because I also really enjoyed talking to Dr. Cheryl Grills as well. She had just amazing conversations about the mental slavery of Black people and a ton of awesome things. As a sociology major, she had my like sociology brain so excited. It just was really great talking with her. And she currently works at Loyola Marymount University. She's been there for 34 years as the director of their psychology research center. And she's just so smart. So I just really enjoyed talking to her. But we talked about the conversation of mental slavery within Black people. And I never had heard of this until I had talked with her and watched her TED Talk about it, which I just thoroughly enjoyed. So I highly recommend Dr. Cheryl Grill's TED Talk on mental slavery. Super good. And it's grounded in the work of a Black psychologist in the Black Community Healing Network. It's to analyze that mental state of Black and African Americans in the aftermath of slavery. So when we deal with anti-Blackness and societal structures that come with it, we carry it and it hurts us. Just because slavery ended and just because racism isn't around, like people like to say, that doesn't mean that we don't still carry that trauma that has happened to us for years and years before this. So it's just very important to remember that when it comes to these conversations as well, because these Black communities are starting to get fed up just because we have simply dealt with this trauma for years and years and it continues to get piled on. So I used her for community togetherness because that was something she was very big on. When you're in these times of turmoil, you can usually kind of see a clear divide in Black communities. And Dr. Cheryl Grills had said, sometimes we're the ones hurting, and that sense of community because of how we talk to each other and how we treat each other, who we befriend and who we don't. I know that I saw this a lot after everything that was happening last year with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. I would see some of my Black like peers not speaking up or not saying things. And it can hurt, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect them. And we have to realize as a community, especially as a Black community, that we need to work together to think about those things more and just to realize those kinds of things there. Oops, didn't mean to click yet. Right. Sorry, I accidentally pulled up the chat to see what was going on. But if you look at our ancestral and cultural traditions around loss, you see the importance of grieving. And if we don't do the appropriate mourning and grieving in those communities, there is going to be a mental toll. And I know I definitely felt this mental toll last year around this time, whenever everything was going on with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all those kinds of things. I definitely felt that toll because I didn't know how to grieve. Everything was happening at one time. All of these traumas were happening. And our community needs to work together to heal. I know we always say like, nobody got us like we got us. So we have to understand the pain that we all feel and we need to be there for each other. And this community extends outside of race, like your locational community, friend community, but it's extremely important within your race because again, nobody understands like you understand and no one understands what you're going through unless they're in that same thing as well. So what do? We're aware of all the problems, so everything should be fine, right? Wrong. No. In order to change, we must, as a society, we have to educate ourselves. We have to push past our bias and prejudice. And that's way easier said than done. I put this quote in here by Maya Angelou just because I really enjoyed it. If you don't like something, change it. And if you can't change it, then change your attitude. So us as a Black community need to work together to have our voices heard and to make change, to let people know that we are hurting and that we need help. And everyone can make a change, but it all starts with you. You can go out to your communities, talk with local police department, get out there, speak up for those who can't speak up. We have to move on from complacency to action. So some people just kind of always wonder, what can they do to start moving from complacency to action? You can hold these conversations in your communities. You can talk to your friends about these things, make it known, let them know what's happening, because a lot of the times it's just simply not in their head. It's kind of in the back of their mind. They don't notice how much it hurts people. And especially because, well, you didn't know him, like they weren't your best friend. This wasn't still someone in my Black community. I see my family there kind of thing. So you kind of have to have those conversations and check in with those around you when those tragedies happen in communities. You also need to look out for those people in your community, and especially those that are people of color, because during these things, it's rough. Like I just know that I had went through a lot of mental toll last year during a lot of this, and it was just really rough. And I did have, luckily had a lot of people that did check in on me and make sure everything was good, but that's part of having those. And then also just having those conversations with law enforcement, politicians, teachers, people that'll listen, and people that are in a position to make a change. Anyone can be in a position to make a change. So as long as you are opening your mouth and speaking to people about what you want to see be changed, you can make that change. So our lives become silent the day we, lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I included that quote from Martin Luther King Jr. just because that is just something that is just so true. If you're going to sit and be silent during all of these things and not open your mouth, and it's just not, it's not worth it. You should be opening it up about things that matter and all of those kinds of things. So just basically in conclusion, we just cannot have change in our society without starting that conversation. Change can be achieved, but only with an open heart and mind. And one day we hope that all these conversations will be a thing of the past. But until then, we'll keep speaking. And then I just wanted to add this photo of my brother actually in a protest this summer in Canonsburg. And he was just walking with a police officer. And this was just something that really was very profound right at this time, because this was shortly after Breonna Taylor, I'm pretty sure. And it was just really nice to get to see that and get to see that kind of community there. And that's kind of something that we want to move, is having this relationship between our community and police officers, in hopes that it'll hopefully lower police brutality in the future. And then that's my presentation.
Thank you very, very much for sharing with us, Kiara. And as I listened to you, what stood out for me was change. Change requires conversation, but that's just the start of it. Change is an action, it's a verb. And so therefore, while we're talking, it has to be something that leads to action. And so I really took that away from what you shared, and I congratulate you on participating in the project, sharing this research. And so we're going to open the floor to anybody who has any questions that they'd like to pose to Kiara at this point. Just a few questions, because we have two more presenters coming up.
I'm in there. It's fine. So Kiara, great presentation. Thank you for sharing. And I actually had this conversation last evening's panel, because that was the first time, and now you're the second time, that I'd heard a student who had been working on some of this material, doing this research, talking about the emotional content of it, right? And really connecting that with your lived life. And so your framing of it was what you learned and how you grew from those interviews, and your takeaways, right? And how do you, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about how you process the emotions that came with engaging these conversations throughout the semester, really. I mean, I've had you kind of busy, so I got two more coming too, by the way, but before the semester ends. But yeah, so I mean, does it drudge up things? Is it a healing moment? Is it something you have to step away from and process? Like, what's the process for you like?
I feel like it's a mix of kind of all of it, because there are some conversations that when we are talking with some of these interviewees, that when I get off the phone, I'm kind of like, whew, okay, I gotta go like take a nap. I gotta go kind of sit down, take a breath, and kind of just think about those things. But at the same time, it also is healing, because when I talk to a lot of these people, especially because they were older and have been through a lot and have done a lot in their careers, they really just had such good insight. And I know I've harbored kind of a lot of anger after everything that happened with police, sometimes even white people a lot. And I know that getting to talk with them and kind of hearing their sides of what they've done and how long they've been working and how much they've changed, it kind of shows me that at some point there can be change. As hard as it seems like it's getting stopped at a wall or that you're not making it, it will get there. And at some point you're going to be able to do something. So I feel like it's kind of a mix of all of it. There are some days that it was pulling stuff up that I was like, okay, I can't do this right now. I'm going to just take a little break. And then there were other days that I got off interviews and I was like, this just made me think about this and this and that. And this made me feel so much better. And like, I just feel like they really opened up a whole stage for me. So yeah, I think it was just kind of a mix of everything there.
And there's a question that we have in the chat that asks, how do we create a space for these types of conversations to be had?
I definitely think whenever you have these types of conversations, they can't be interrogative. They have to be more of I'm trying to think of the right words I'm trying to say, because I had a class where we learned like how to have these conversations. I was about to say with Jane Walsh, actually, hello. But we did have the class about talking about when you have these conversations, not pointing that finger directly at people and saying, well, this is because this happened with you, and making it more of that open kind of conversation of, this is how I felt when this happened, and this is why I feel this way, and all of those kind of things, and opening it more as less of, this is your fault and you don't understand, why don't you understand what I'm telling you, and more of, let me explain why and let me help you try to understand. So I think it's more of just a conversational setting instead of an interrogative setting of those conversations.
Thank you so much, Kiara. And that's a very important segue into our next presenter, because the whole notion of perspective and what we bring to a conversation is very important. And so with that, we're going to introduce or bring to the fore Nate Clair and Kevin Lemus Moreno from IUP, who will be sharing with us their presentation on views on the police force. So I'm going to ask our presenters to take over and introduce themselves.
All right, before we start sharing, I just want to give a little hi. I'm Nate. Kevin, if you want to introduce yourself, go ahead. But so our presentation, we have a PowerPoint I'm going to pull up here in a second, but we wanted to get the both sides, not just of citizens, like, because in the media we hear about a lot of activists, citizens like speaking up and doing the right thing, trying to make change in our great country. But we also felt like there were a lot of sides from the police we weren't hearing as well. So we actually interviewed, we made a survey. So we took a survey from anybody in Pennsylvania, but we had a lot of police officers or people in law enforcement answer. And we also had a lot of just regular citizens like us answer. So we had a very wide demographic, which we'll get into. But all right, where do I share the screen at? There we go. Hold on. What the heck did I just press? I'm losing it. Sorry, everyone.
Kevin can use this second to introduce himself.
Yes.
Okay, well, Nate figures that out. So as he has mentioned, our goal was to find this perspective of both sides, not just one. And another about me, well, as mentioned, I'm from IUP. I'm a sophomore, and I'm a marketing major with a minor in economics. And I'm also part of the National Guard. So I would like to, that's one of the reasons we kind of decided to hear the other side, since I know, like, personally, I know what it is to be in a certain type of training and serve 40 people, and it's not as easy as what people think. You can go ahead, Nate.
All right. So again, it's view of the police force from both sides by me and Kevin. So first of all, we just wanted to show you guys, we had a lot of this stuff. It was a lot of fill in the blank stuff in our survey, and we had 70 people that had like viable answers. It was like a lot of people put like NA, or they just left it blank. So we had 70 good answers that we used throughout this survey. So we just want to give you a little background with who we had in the survey. Then this was just the age of our participants, because we originally were thinking, why don't we just go for law enforcement then college students? Because as young people in this country, we have we're the future. So people rely on us to push for change, make change. So we thought just showing you guys that we just had more than just college kids or just law enforcement. This survey went out to everyone in Pennsylvania. We sent it out to people and they could share it with others. So we don't even know who these people are, some of them, but some people, they could be from Philly or from Pittsburgh, Erie, State College. So we just wanted to make sure this could be a very broad spectrum for everyone to answer, because we felt like if we just enclose it to one area, it's not telling us much about the diversity of our entire state. And then this is also interactive. So I want people to answer this because we just want to hear your feedback. So do you personally think different training could have prevented instances of shooting of unarmed minorities like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others? So feel free to just talk out.
I'll say yes and no.
All right.
Just mostly because, yes, because like like with George Floyd, that was his knee on his neck was not even something that they trained at all. So that could have been from his bias that he could have done that. So that's why I feel like sometimes training might not help. But at the same time, some people genuinely, just with Breonna Taylor shooting her in her sleep, all those kinds of things, not doing what you're supposed to do before you go into someone's house, things like that, that could have helped. And I feel like in that situation, so I think it's a mix of both. Yes and no.
All right. Dr. Watson, I saw you popped up a no on there. Do you want to explain?
Sure. So I've been working with police trainees in the academy and learning a little bit about how they train. And I actually think that at least locally in Indiana, the training they're getting is pretty good. And I understand that that's happening across the nation, and yet we continue to see these incidents happen. So I don't think it's about the training.
All right, thank you for that. Anybody else? Come on, this is open. Feel free to talk. I don't bite, so feel free.
There's no wrong answer.
Hi. I chimed in the chat, and I said that it could certainly help the training, but I think that it's more complicated in some circumstances than simply training, and I think that it might be more reflective of attitudes rather than procedural training. So that's kind of how I look at it.
All right, thank you for that.
And if we're going to be more specific, if for those of you who have been following the case, the Chauvin trial, his actual training officer mentioned that this is not, what he did was not a part of his training. So it leads us to assume that there is training that they receive, but then persons probably, for whatever reason, do otherwise.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. So this was all 70 people, police, like law enforcement and non-law enforcement. So if you look in the men, it's split even between the men. As you see, 21.4, 21.4. That, so when you break down just the men, it's 50-50. They believe that it's literally a coin flip. Like police training could have helped, but also not. But women, on the other hand, which I thought was very interesting, because I thought it'd be the other way around. Women agree more that a lot of different training could have prevented a lot of these instances where there's a very small amount of women that believed it wouldn't. So I just thought that was interesting, especially from Dr. Watson saying that, because most people we found, or most women in the survey we found, were leaning towards it would have helped. So Kevin, you want to take the next slide here?
Yes, can I? All right, so the next one is, what do you believe makes a police officer a good police officer? So again, just like the other questions, it's open-ended, and we would like to hear your feedback before we actually show you the information we gathered from the survey.
Okay, let me jump in on that one. I believe that a good police officer is anyone who takes on the responsibility, understanding that their job, their responsibility is to protect and to serve. That's what makes a police officer. This is not an easy job, and I highly respect anyone who takes on that responsibility to do that. But again, they must have a clear understanding of what it is that they are committing to do.
Okay.
Yeah, actually with that one, going to the next one, from the citizens, because we broke it down with citizens and not, so we actually found that protecting the citizens and their rights and serving the community, those were two of the biggest, like we put our top 5 answers here, but a lot of these questions, like we kind of hinted a lot in those, but those two were the major like bullet points for citizens looking at the police. They believe that you should be protecting and serving. And also they thought they should be protecting rights, where they felt like a lot of these rights, with everything that's been happening, especially in the past year and a half, 2 years, a lot of the rights people feel like have been infringed upon. So they thought, we kind of wrapped in citizens' rights with that, because we felt like that was also a very important key to hit on, especially with everything that's been happening. But serving the community was also very big for us. But the other ones were obey and enforce the laws in place, which again, that kind of falls back on the training, and then enforce the morals around them in the world. So we just thought those 5 were the very most important keys to hit on. And Kevin?
All right, then for the next one, on the actual law enforcement responses, most of them on themselves think that what makes them a good officer is that they have to follow good morals, which being truthful, since I know when they go into the police force, they have to make an oath. So they have to always be truthful to oneself. They have to follow their training, since they have to be known and actually be professional on what they're doing and not just going in to become an officer and receive the higher status. Just as the other one we saw is service to the community. If they decide to become a police officer, it's because they want to give back to the community, not just to benefit from said authority. They also thought on something that they have to be good people with skills, and they can know how to understand other people and know how to interact. Somebody start deciding. And last of all will be they have to be respectful and fair with everyone else besides on who they are interacting with. So that's what they thought on themselves, what makes a good police officer. But we also had like a lot of other answers that you guys see in the chart there. But we thought those were like top 5 answers on what like most answers fit into.
Yeah. And then we actually here, if this thing will move. Okay, here we go. There we go. Wait, did I just skip one? There we go. So me and Kevin, we decided to take a look at this because we felt like, especially being a good cop, like what makes a good cop, we felt like that had a very big impact between like trying to find the balance between the law enforcement and the citizens. We thought there'd be like, if we find anything intertwined, that is what we feel like needs to be worked on in our communities and society to make the world we live in a better place. So Kevin, why don't you start out here?
So as we mentioned before, on both sides of the spectrum, they both agree that they have to serve the community. The citizens think that if police serve the community and actually help the people, make them feel safe and not overusing power and control, that actually makes them a good police officer. It's just as like the police officers themselves, they think if they know how to professionally act, they're actually doing their job and not just pretend to be someone with a badge. You can go with
yeah, and then for both sides believe in the training. Both parties believe that there are flaws in the training. Like that we're like, yes, there's a lot of departments that are much better at training versus others, like state cops versus local cops. Like there's a lot of different variations going on there. But from a lot of the answers we got, both sides agree that the training is important because with what's been going on in our world, there's been bad cases. Like you don't need to tear gas crowds. Like I'm going to be completely honest. Like seeing that some of those clips, like it hurts me to see what the world has become. But also, there's also those great instances where you have trained police officers being able to handle a situation respectfully without letting anything get out of hand. So a lot of people agreed that there needs to be improvement on training, but also with the training they've received, things could be going. It could look like we're burning this whole country to the earth. So that's at least what I got out of that. Kevin, why don't you take the next one?
Okay, and then for the last one, for respect, we don't even have to go into the police to understand that if you do not give respect, you cannot expect to get respect back from. So what we understood is that if one of them does not give the sign of respect, obviously the other one will like to react as a defensive way. So if they both find a common ground on being respectful, even on their differences, they'll be able to work up to actually changing their images on the police force and not just trying to rush differences and make, oh, well, I'm in the correct path, you have to do this. And then the other one think, well, I'm a police officer, you have to follow what we say. So if they both respect each other's opinions, they will actually get to an agreement and actually trust one another.
All right, now going off that, we wanted to see what the police officers or anybody in law enforcement should see, or what they wanted to say that we should know before we just rush to judgments about who they are as people or as a general. They pretty much don't want us to generalize. And the 3 most common answers we got, 4 police officers said that the media doesn't show the whole picture. Now, granted, yes, there's some instances where part of the training, especially with George Floyd, you don't teach somebody to put their knee straight on somebody's neck or on their high back where it could cause serious injury. But a lot of the instances, they don't show the entire footage. And that's usually caught by a body cam or a dash cam in a police car, which I felt like was very, like, which I feel like most people knew, but I also feel like if you're going to tell stories like that, you need to be able to show and back it up with the whole video and know the whole backstory. Two officers said we need to think what we would do in situations. Those two, they put very long answers, so I tried to condense it as best as I could. They're basically saying, like, what if we were in that like situation, how would we react to it? Which I thought was when I read those two answers, I started thinking deep about what I would do. And yeah, I just started thinking deep. My mind gets going easily. Sorry, I'm getting off topic. I like to talk a lot. Sorry. But then 3 said that there's always bad apples in the world, no matter what profession you're in. But we don't, as a society, we shouldn't be judging an entire like profession off of bad apples here and there. Like, there's a lot of good men and women that serve in the police force or in some sort of law enforcement around our country that we shouldn't be making judgments about the entirety of all police officers.
All right, somebody commented in the chat, but we are not the ones trained to handle these situations. So asking us that what we would do may not be fair way to look at it.
All right, Kevin, you want to take this question?
Yeah, we'll get back to that question after we do it. So, all right, so then now the question is, as someone who is not a police officer, what is one thing you would want officers to consider when they interact with civilians?
Feel free to talk now.
Oh,
All right, some would say they need to be invested in communities they deserve. That's a really good one. Anyone else?
I think the very word civilians presents a challenge for me. Thinking of them as civilians rather than as citizens. I think if they start to view them as citizens and move away from that civilian versus, we might have a difference in how people interact. That's my take.
that's such a good point. It just kind of stopped me. I forgot what I was going to say. Like, that just did it for me. Drop the mic.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. Anybody else? Feel free. Come on. Me and Kevin don't bite. There's no wrong answers, guys.
I agree with what Dr. Carolyn was just saying. I think just trying to change that civilian view, and also, let me see who said, it was also Carolyn, that the citizens aren't the ones that are supposed to be trained. We're not trained to just know how to live, you know what I mean? Like, so I think it's just kind of, yeah, like, I agree with what she was saying. Just the citizens, when they start looking at them as less than civilians and just people in their community and more as citizens and humans, I think that can just change a lot there too.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So Kevin, take it away here, buddy.
All right. So just as the other ones, we had received a lot of answers and we tried to narrow it down on the best 3 options. And we thought that how they present to the public is a really good one, like their image on how they first interact with the citizens and not civilians, like you guys say, is that if you guys get stopped, a lot of people get really nervous. So a lot of people are scared of the police. They don't trust them. Instead of feeling safe, they feel unsafe. And many reasons of this is because people grow up differently and they have different views of the police. Some people don't think they are actually using their power and they're like overusing it and it's imbalanced. So that's because of that, people try to avoid the police, or if they even see them, they try to walk away instead of actually going towards them to feel more secure, or even try to ask how they're doing. And other people just overall think police are total bullies, because there's this thing they're saying, I forgot what it is, that police overly start stopping people and giving them tickets just to they can get more money overall. And other people want them to be more professional when they are first seen. Like when they see them, they expect them to be like respectful so they can get respect as well back. They want them to know how to control situations and not only go in straight force, and to only be able to know when they have to use force on actual extreme scenarios, or if they even have to use force at all. And I also want them to put aside their personal beliefs and do not have biases, considering of however they grew up. Like that's because if they, let's say somebody thinks about the LGBT, if they don't agree with it, they have to put that aside and just still be on side of the law and know how to properly act. And overall, all that goes on their image and how they portray themselves to the public, how they actually show them. Are they being friendly? Are they being intimidating? Are they actually being helpful, or are they actually just in there showing they're not helping anyone else and they're just being disrespectful? So overall, that's what we thought that were like the three main characteristics of that cops should think when they start to interact with citizens, on how they show themselves, how professional they're being, and to be aware that not everyone is trusting them, but they have to know how to interact to gain that trust back.
Yeah. And yeah, that was it. Thank you. If you have any additional questions, feel free to ask. Like I said, I like to talk a lot, so feel free.
Yeah,
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead. My apologies,
so
Kevin.
they're fine. I just said, so there are some questions in the chat.
Yes.
So, and obviously there's like, it's not just black and white. Me personally, I'm a Hispanic, so I have seen a lot of those type of things as well. And I believe that comes on our part. We don't trust them as well. So, and that goes back to respect to be respected. And I know we do not have the training they got. So it's like, it was more under them doing the first step than actually us doing the first step. But it will be fine if we actually show a common ground, like the other things we have in common, to actually give them the community and get involved with them and show a different image to change their perspective that not everyone is bad, regardless of their own personal beliefs or biases. So we have to try to you have to get away of that there's only black and white and get into more like in gray area that not everyone is good, not everyone is bad. Because in our also responses on things that people want the cops to consider is that some civilians are actually dangerous and they can get harmful, so they always have to be cautious on what they do. And it's not only on that the cops are bad, but there's also some civilians agreeing that there's some dangerous civilians out there that just want to harm them. So it is part about finding a common ground and understanding each other, not instead of just trying to make one another be enemies. I remember there was one of the responses that said they wanted us to trust one another and actually become closer and become a family in a way. That's all the questions.
Are you taking the questions in the chat, Kevin?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to.
Okay.
Nate, you feel free to hop in.
Huh?
I just wanted to add that Nate and Kevin, when they did their analysis, we did not get a lot of diversity in the responses in terms of racial diversity of the respondents. That's the reason that those results were not reported out. We did actually collect it. It's only, I think we have 7 or 8 folks who responded who were of different race or ethnicity. So it wasn't enough to have statistical significance, so it's not reported.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions from our audience?
Just a brief comment and a question. I think these conversations are just absolutely wonderful. Those of you who have taken on the responsibility for not only organizing all of this, but getting the students involved should be applauded for the hard work that you've put in. And in this particular day and age, I can't think of a more critical discussion. But one of the items that I wanted to put on the table was, and this is supposed to be my effort at humor. I'm not very good at telling jokes, but I didn't see anybody in my age demographic at all. And so I'm hoping that the next time around, you'll move the bar a little further out so that you can get some gray-haired people like myself involved in all of this. But the other and more serious question has to do with standards. A long time ago, as they say nowadays, in another galaxy, I worked with Philadelphia, Pennsylvania cops, police officers. And one of the things that I discovered then, it may not be true now, was that so many of them were educationally deficient. They had no high school degrees. They hadn't read any books. When you ask them about the conversations that they had about what we would today call diversity, they were almost always without any substantive response. Generally speaking, they went off of their guts in terms of responding to situations that we might put forward. So I think the question the question of standards, which was raised, I think, by Kiara, is really very vital, because the better educated the police are, and the better educated we are about their standards, is one of the ways in which we can bring about some healing. I know when I go out of, then I'm going to stop. I know when I go out of the door today in this climate, I make doubly sure that I have my wallet, my owner's card, and all the other necessities that show my ownership of what I'm doing and where I'm going, because of the anxiety levels that that exist out there. And I live in a relatively isolated environment, but still, this is a culturally bound disease. And unless it's handled culturally across the board, we will be having these conversations ad nauseum. But again, I want to thank the presenters for a very stimulating afternoon.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Trotman. And as we continue with our presentation, I just want to pose something to Nate and Kevin. Words matter. And in tying it to Kiara's presentation about that whole notion of conversation, talking to each other to effect change, I was reflecting on some of the data that you shared about what law enforcement saw as their top 5, I think it was their purpose or what they thought they were supposed to do. And even what the citizenry thought. And it's talked about enforcing the law and seeing themselves as law enforcement officers as opposed to peacekeepers. You see the information, there's a shift in your mind when you think of that. And so I wanted to ask you this. If their focus is on law enforcement, what happens when the laws that they're being asked to enforce are unjust or oppressive? And I know Dr. Watson had posted something about the laws that are now being passed. And I know in Florida, we just saw that happen, where there are now more stringent penalties for demonstrators who are perceived as rioters. So can you just share with us a little bit about your thoughts, and then we'll move into Eric's presentation. What if the laws are unjust or oppressive? What then?
Oh dear.
Well, actually, I know, like, when we were actually getting the questions, what we wanted to ask, we did have one that said, what if they're similar to the Jim Crow laws? They were according to the law, but they were not actually doing justice. They were actually harming people. So I remember when we were talking with Dr. Watson, we were trying to figure out, do police officers, are they to protect civilians and ensure the law, or are they just enforcing the law? So that's one of our debates to actually figure out what would it be like. What is their actual job? Do they have to protect the people and make them feel secure, or do they have to enforce the law and just do their job, like actually follow the law? Because I don't think when we try to do that research, I don't think we actually found their actual job is not protecting them, but it's actually make sure people follow the law and make sure everything stays in order. So in that case, in a way, that's when that we brought up the question, what makes a good police officer? That's why we asked that one, because we wanted to know what's their aspects on it. If it's someone who follows the law and enforce it, or is it someone who's moral and gives trust and makes people feel secure. So that's why we brought that question, to figure out what people think, because obviously the Jim Crow's law, they were according to law, but they were not actually doing any better for civilians overall.
And Kevin, we hear your military experience coming through when you refer to us as civilians. I come from a military family as well, so I can relate. My mom called me a civilian, okay? So thank you. As we move ahead, because we're now up on 12:54. Sorry.
Eric was on, but he did message me due to a personal issue. He had to leave and will not be able to present, so I do apologize.
Oh, no.
He was on, but I did see that he left, and I messaged him, and he said that he would not be able to present due to some personal issue. So I do apologize for that.
Okay, well, I think that it leaves us with more time to extend the conversation with Nate and Kevin and Kiara. And I'm so sad that we won't be able to hear from Eric, because it would have been a really good continuation, because his topic was going to focus on the feud between the black and the blue and the fight for justice too. Wouldn't that have been a nice bow to put on what we're talking about? So let's continue to talk. Let us continue to talk. Can any one of our presenters share their view on whether or not the whole notion of the persons who are there to, I guess, serve and protect, should there be a push in terms of our conversation leading to action for us to move away from the nomenclature of law enforcement and focus more on the idea of having peacekeepers? Also, I want you to give some thought to whether or not you think police officers who are policing a community should be required to be members of that community, as opposed to policing communities where they have no vested interest.
So actually, that second question, I can speak to that. So my cousin, he's actually a cop for my town. He just got hired about less than a month ago. But I actually asked him that question because I told him I was doing this presentation, and he's like, well, what do you think? I'm like, and we just started having a conversation about the results I had. And he goes, yeah, and one of my things is, he's like, I believe somebody, if you're going to be a local police officer, you should have to live in that community, because you know those community values, or you can at least come to learn them if you just move there. And you're literally serving your community. So that one, I believe you should have to live there, because you want to be able to be connected with your town. You shouldn't just be driving 45 minutes to go protect some small town or some city that you don't even live at. So that's at least my perspective on that one.
I agree a lot with Nate, just also because whenever we were talking with Mayor Ella Jones, a lot of communities have very different feelings and relations with their police force and just in general, and their way that they handle tragedies in their community and things like that. And I think it is very important for police to be from there so they understand that. And so it's something that's not just, okay, well, you're in this community and we're going to tell you about this community and you're looking at statistics on a paper. It's more of, I know these people, I see these people, I've lived here, I understand what's going on. Because when it comes to a lot of these cases of police brutality, I think that's where that disconnect is that they never experience anything like that in their own community, or they don't understand it, or they just don't get it. And I think it helps a lot more if, when those things happen, if you are in that community that you live in and you understand. Just because I know whenever Mayor Ella was talking about her Ferguson, it's like mostly a Black community, and they have a lot of white cops at the time when this had happened, and they just didn't understand the community dynamics at all, which is just simple, because I mean, why would you if you don't live there and you're not in that community? So I just do think it's very important for police to be in that community, just because you just need to understand that. And I think also people will feel more comfortable with someone that they know is in their community coming to them and trying to talk to them about things, rather than if someone that you've never seen, never heard of, doesn't live here, just moved here, got this job, and is trying to enforce things or trying to be that peacekeeper whenever you're like, you don't even know what peace you're trying to keep. So yeah, I think it's just, I agree with Nate.
Yes, we have a hand raised.
I know that after the January 6th riot at the Capitol, they interviewed I believe he was a retired Washington, D.C. Police chief. And he said that should think of their jobs as supporting people's rights rather than enforcing the laws. And that just creates a whole different mindset.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I
Any other?
think for officers to consider themselves protecting the rights and defending the constitutions, because as we travel going to conferences and to work, we cross borders, and every time you cross a border, there's going to be a different type of interaction within that community. And because I'm on the outside of that community, you can't expect, my tag may say IUP Hawks, and this may be another school's town. And so you can't hold me responsible for not being a part of that community. But what you can do is make sure that you're defending my rights while I'm there.
I think Rod had a question or a comment.
Yeah, when it comes to a police, I think that I think I've used the word attitudes a couple times today already. And for example, if I see I was getting gas yesterday, and if I see a police officer, and I was in California, PA, I see the police officer, I automatically start thinking, what am I doing wrong, and what can I do right? I was driving on the turnpike over the weekend, and I saw a couple state police officers, and then I started thinking, what am I doing wrong, and what am I doing right? What can I do right? And I think that with the police, the function of the police needs to change to the extent where we are not assessing our behaviors around the police, and because I think we all do it. If the police, if we see the police on the road, all of a sudden we're 10-2 and we're the best drivers that you ever saw. Or if you're going 80 on a 70, all of a sudden you get down to 65 miles an hour. And obviously I'm just kind of using the driving as my example, but in other circumstances too, wherever you're at, you start assessing, and I think that in some places it's good to have policing, but I think that we have such a fear rather than a reverence or respect for the police. And obviously I've known police officers. My mom's dad was a county police officer, and my uncle, my mom's brother, and then my dad's cousin. So I know police, but that's maybe a limited example of like police that I know. But rather than see that, like, all right, well, that's the good cop, but that other cop, he's a real ass. Like we shouldn't have that sort of fear of what would be, like Dr. Nienkamp said, like oppressive, like a ISA, ideological state apparatus, or RSA or whatever. But we shouldn't see that way. We should not be assessing our behaviors if we're doing something so inconsequential that could subsequently get us killed. I see police, we shouldn't necessarily fear that, like, well, this might be the last time I see the police.
And it's
I rambled a little bit.
It's interesting. I saw an art. Well, it was a video clip on the internet this morning where two friends, a white female and a black male, were exchanging their experiences having been pulled over by the police. And the experience with the black gentleman was caught on the dash cam. And he was pulled over. Of course, he puts both hands out the window. He's taken the position, and the police officer comes out, and her weapon is drawn, approaching the car. And they ask him his name. He confirms his identity, and then they said, "Oh, there's a warrant out for you." And he's like, "I don't know what you're talking about," but he exits the car. They detain him, and then they do their check and realize that he's not the person. And when they did the check, the guy who it was supposed to be had used the fellow's name. It looks completely different. But the first thing was weapons drawn, cops are surrounding his car, he is detained. The young lady then gives her experience where it's late, she's coming home, she's tired, and she's pulled over. And she's annoyed because she was pulled over and she's tired and she's coming home. And the officer approaches her and says to her, you know, license and registration. And she's exasperated and she turns around, gets her book bag from the back seat. Now let's pause right there. Imagine if it was a Black person who, first of all, has the audacity to show their exasperation to the police officer who just stopped them, and then turns around to retrieve their book bag on the back seat. And the encounter continues, and she goes in her bag and she asks her for the insurance card or whatever, and she's flustered, and the officer says, I think you need a moment. Just sit in your car and I'll give you a few minutes. And the officer returns to their vehicle and allows the young lady to sit in her car and collect herself. Are we seeing the difference here? And she said that her friend who was stopped, he then you know, live streamed and said to them that, you know, I could have died today. And he was just very present and aware that this stop could have gone very differently. And he says, I could have died. And she said when she saw his video and reflected on what happened with her, it brought her to tears. And she says, what makes it different? What makes your life or the value of your life different than mine? And I thought about the fact that them sharing this exchange, this conversation, would have been something that could be something we use as part of our teaching, part of our research, part of our conversations. You know, what makes it different? When did we get to the place where kids are no longer seeing the police officers as the person who helps you across the street, the person you go to when you're lost? That's how I grew up. If you're lost, you find a policeman. He was a person who knew where you live and would take you home. And now when my husband leaves the house, I'm in panic until he gets home. When my brothers leave the house, my nephews are coming up. And I think about all of you college age students who, college kids are going to do crazy stuff because that's what kids do. But they don't deserve to die. And so this whole conversation of how we interact with law enforcement, or should we say peacekeepers, even just that conversation. And Kiara, I sincerely hope that as you continue with your research, and Nathan and Kevin, and maybe you can share with us what your plans are as it relates to continuing this research and this conversation, and what can we do as a community to help to support some of what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Actually, I was going to chime in earlier when you were telling that story, and I felt like when we were asked the citizens, we had that slide up. It was like the citizens with the police officers, like their images to like citizens. It was like all three of our big ones, not trusted, being professional in their image, all like felt prevalent when you're telling that story, because like you're not going to be like, if you pull a gun on a Black man who literally has both his hands out the car, that's showing that you don't trust, and that trust goes both ways. And that's also not being professional. Like you don't go up with basically guns ready to start shooting at, like, no. But I just felt like when with that question we posed and had the answers to on the slide, I felt like that story really well connected with that. So I just want to make that comment.
Thank you for that. I think Dr. Hester had a question or a comment.
Hi, thanks everybody. I've been camera shy, but I've been listening to everything. And Nate, and I want to thank you, and Kevin, I want to thank you, and Kiara, I want to thank you. I have so many thoughts. I just want to share a little bit. Keep up the work, because I will say over the last 2 years doing this work at my university, I've become completely exhausted. And in part, it really is that I always have my classrooms as a space for really hashing things out. And in one class in particular called Human Rights, I forced the question. And so in the fall, most of the class was about police reform. And I had to change tactics because the dialogue wasn't happening. It became vicious, it became microaggressive, it became aggressive, and it's just interesting to me, for somebody who's been teaching for 17 years, that in the Trump era, it became such that we couldn't even talk about these things in a classroom environment where it was safe. And even the dialogue programs on campus that I run, we've been rethinking them. Just one example is that we had a diversity and inclusion training that included talking to the police, and the trainers were people from internally, and the trainers felt so annihilated after doing this that they cut the training. I mean, part of it was because we had a federal order coming in saying, hey, you may not be able to do any of these trainings. And so in our campus, people who didn't want to do the training said, hey, you're violating a federal order. The people who were running the trainings were exhausted. So I really think it's important, the work that you're doing, and Kiara, all those interviews. And I just had this idea of maybe the police officers and the community watching that TED Talk about, what was it, mental slavery and trauma, and really talking about it, because there was such a gap between even like, I just tried to imagine a group that had every age, every demographic, had police, had non-police, and we read like Michelle Alexander or something that just gave a sociological perspective on what we're doing. That these conversations broke down at my university this year. They're broken. So keep doing this, and your energy is so appreciated. But Kiara, could you imagine a whole room full of people watching that? I just watched a little bit of it when Dr. Watson put it in there. But could you imagine that maybe being part of the police training? So anyway, thank you so much, everybody.
Yes. And a quick question that I have for Nate and Kevin, and I'm sure that, I'm sorry, Dr. Watson had to leave, but will you be sharing your research with the police of Pennsylvania, the various units, whatever we call them?
Yeah, so me and Kevin, we later in the project, because we were our IRB, I think. Yeah, IRB, sorry. A lot of letters, not good with letters, you know how it is. But so we talked about that, but we were late just trying to word our questions, getting the IRB in, that we were just trying to rush to get this presentation ready for today. But we started talking about it a little bit last night as we were getting this touched up, and we weren't 100% sure what we were going to do, but we were debating showing it, or at least sending it out to IUP's Police Academy. Because they train a lot of, or prepare a lot of guys to be a state cop, or just like local cops in general, or even campus police. But we debated doing that, but also we still have a lot of the questions, because this is 3 or 4 of a 18 to 20 question survey that we still have a lot to go through and a lot of the different demographics to break down. So eventually I hope we get it to the police academy, but that it'll take time.
Okay. I think
Kevin.
Kiara may have wanted to say something.
I'm trying to think of what I wanted to say. I lose my train of thought very fast.
All right, while you're thinking, I'm just going to post in the chat the evaluation for today's session. We still have business to take care of. And so I'm going to post that link, the link for evaluation. And then I'll also be posting the link for your attendance receipt as well. And one thing I'd like to throw out there for anybody who wants to take it. So that's the link for the evaluation. And then this is the link for your, so there are 2 links there. It just looks like it's all one for your attendance. As we await the verdict in the George Floyd case, the Chauvin case, and we see the nation, particularly the major cities, preparing for the verdict, I was struck by what the preparation looked like. And we see barbed wire, we see chain link fences, we see armored guards, we see armored trucks, and we see citizens on one side and law enforcement on the other side. And I look at it and I say to myself, what are we shaping up for? What is lost in and I come back to Kiara saying a conversation. What is lost? Why is it that there is not a conversation between both sides, particularly the law enforcement, as to how to reduce, cut, prevent, diffuse what could possibly be serious explosion, what would you say needs to happen in our society to bring both parties together before? I mean, maybe I'm an eternal optimist, maybe I'm just a simpleton, I don't know. But maybe the horses left the barn, in this situation, but how could this have been prevented? How could we have prevented citizen against citizen?
I feel just kind of learning and knowledge, just because a lot of people, first of all, don't even realize where police kind of came from, why they started. Jails and prisons were basically just slavery, just without being slaves. So I feel like a lot of the times people don't understand why Black people, or even just anybody, gets so upset about these things, because to them, we are getting mad at the people right now in 2021, the police that are here standing in front of us. But that's not fully what it is. It's everything that's led up to this, and it's the past, and it's all those kinds of things. So I think it's important to continue to talk with each other, like we said, have those conversations, and to just learn more about where everything started and why these are such big issues, rather than just, and I remembered what those conversations are called. They're called I versus you conversations. So instead of looking at law enforcement saying, you aren't following these rules and you are doing all these things wrong, we need to look at it more of as I felt like this is going this way, or I felt this kind of thing. And I think those conversations also will help between citizens, rather than you as a white person aren't standing up for me, or you as this person aren't doing what you're supposed to do, and more of, I want to tell you what this is, and I want to tell you how I'm feeling. And I think just having that open kind of area for those issues to kind of be laid out and talked more of in depth, and rather of just something that's happening right now in 2021, and more of something that's been happening and it's just starting to overflow kind of idea. And I think that's, if you start looking at it like that, rather than this is something that happened last year, now all of a sudden people are mad. Black Lives Matter just popped up last year, now people are mad, but that's not what it is. So I think that's just also a lot of that confusion between citizens themselves causes a lot of these bigger issues, because they just really don't genuinely understand it, I think.
Okay, thank you. And I know that our conversation could go on and on and on, but we are literally right up against the clock. I mean, where did the time go? And so I want to extend our sincere thanks to our presenters today, Kiara Campbell, Nate Clair, and Kevin Lemus Moreno. Job well done. And we look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you to everyone who participated, who was here. We thank you for your support as we continue in the work of the Frederick Douglass Institutes across the state, the work of the collaborative. Thank you again to our tech person, Nedrick and Christopher. Thanks to everyone again. Okay, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Appreciate it, everyone.
Excellent job today, guys.
Yes.
Great job.